our keynote speakers for joining us. And we will begin our time together today with what promises to be a fantastic keynote presentation by Simone Joy O. How's that? A globally recognized professional in all areas of fund development. She has over 30 years of experience in our sector. With her bachelor's and master's degree achieved, she continued on with her studies and has pursued additional certifications. Over the course of her career, she has been certified as a certified fundraising executive and was one of the first to receive her advanced certified fundraising executive credential. She also received the International Advanced Diploma in Fundraising, which is an international master's level qualification in fundraising. And in 2019, this amazing mentor to many of us was honored as the AFP Distinguished Fellow. I first knew of her amazing work and was touched by her commitment when I served as the exam committee chair of the CFRE International. And one of her books was on the resource reading list. And then I discovered the knowledge and the amazing information that she was so willing to give to our profession. And I know each person on this call has been touched by her leadership. So I know we will be inspired by her keynote address today on fund development in the new normal. Her session is being monitored by Kevin Hughes, and Kevin is the Associate Vice President for Advancement at New College Foundation and a committee member for our 2020 Fundraisers Forum event, as well as a program committee member for our chapter. Kevin will be monitoring questions that are submitted on chat, and will pass them along to Simone when it is time. So with that said, I am so pleased, Simone, that you have joined us today, and we are in awe of you and excited to hear from you. So I will now turn this over to you and let you begin to share this wonderful, amazing knowledge that you have.
Thank you very much. So I have to tell you, and this is kind of a warning, all right? I'm pretty angry. And I'm angry about Black Lives Matter, and I'm angry about the status of women, and I'm angry about the way we're handling COVID, et cetera, et cetera. I've been angry for quite a while. But for me, my anger actually gives me hope. It's what makes me go, okay, well, then I'll fight more. And so while you will hear anger as I chat today, I want you to know that I believe you and I, our organizations, can fix this, so to speak. Now, there is a handout, and I can't remember if it was sent in advance or it's available afterwards. Sent in advance. Okay. So, I want to start with what everybody's been talking about, which is the new normal. And there's just no way we could have forecasted this. I disagree. I believe we could have and should have forecasted all of this. We've had health pandemics before. HIV/AIDS, flu, Ebola, etc. We've had recessions. We have a recession like every 7 years, so hopefully we're all planning for it, right? Every single year. And so I want to share with you a quote from Roger Craver. If you don't know Roger, you must. He does a daily free blog called The Agitator. Roger is one of the foremost direct mail writers this country has ever seen. He's won every single award for nonprofit and political. direct mail. So here's what Roger said in the Agitator blog of April 20th. So he says, one thing I've learned is that downturns expose organizational weaknesses, poor practices, and downright neglect. So I ask you to think about those things. When the proverbial shit hits the fan, what it shows is the organizational weaknesses we have, the poor practices, and downright neglect. So I'm going to sort of go through these sorts of things. If you have a burning question that like you have to have answered immediately, then Kevin will stop me and I'll answer it then. Otherwise, I'm going to stop about 10 minutes before the end and you can ask questions. So one of the ways I frequently introduce myself is like this. Hello, my name is Simone. I'm a white, heterosexual, well-educated, affluent woman. I win, except for gender, because it's a disadvantage to be a woman in every country in the world. And just as an aside, according to the most recent study of the World Economic Forum, the US in gender equity is rated 53. But, that's like 52 countries in the world are ahead of us in gender equity. So here I am, white, heterosexual, well-educated, affluent woman. I win, except for gender. My mom and dad paid for college, so that was really cool, right? I was born heterosexual. And so I feel privileged because of that. And I see that as unearned privilege. And part of my life's work, my personal life's work, my charitable giving, is to build social justice and equity. So Black Lives Matter, it's like, still, we don't get it as white people? Or we get it, but we can't quite, fix it. So it's interesting because sometimes when I introduce myself that way, which you understand I'm doing on purpose, to rile people up, to get them to think. And people, I've gotten evaluations that say, I didn't come to listen to this woman talk about stuff like that. It's like, excuse me. Okay. So think about a conversation you could be having tomorrow at your office about what are the organizational weaknesses we have that affect our fundraising, that affect our governance, etc. So when you think about your fundraising, what do you think about as weaknesses? Here are some of the weaknesses I always hear about, okay? There's the well-missy weakness. So I was presenting to a group one day. I had been asked to come in and talk about fundraising and governance to the staffs, senior staff and the board. And I was talking about the concept of opinion versus expertise, and you have a handout on that. And I was talking about body of knowledge. And at a certain point, a gentleman to my right reached over, patted me on the arm, and said, well, Missy, I've served on more boards than you are old. And I responded, but I'm right and you're wrong, and here's the IRS handout. So, do we as fundraisers know the body of knowledge? Do we help our boss and our boards understand the body of knowledge so that the well-missy guy doesn't do that? all right? And what I find is that we aren't as knowledgeable as we should be. So sometimes I'm suggesting, and I would say to all of you, and I'd say to Janet, here's a book you should read. Here's articles you should read, okay? This is what we have to follow. And you know what I hear sometimes? I'm too busy. I can't read. It's like, but you'd learn how to write direct mail better if you read books by Jeff Brooks or Tom Ahern. If you looked at the research in the UK from Mark Phillips. So we can't be too busy. We cannot rely on personal opinion because that doesn't work. So for a moment, think about the last time you were at a fundraising committee meeting. Within the last year, I've gotten 3 or 4 emails from people, and you couldn't tell they were crying exactly in the email, but they were crying. And they said, I just came back from a fundraising meeting, and all the members of the fundraising committee, who are all board members, had ideas. So we talked about their ideas. We don't need any ideas in fundraising. No ideas. There's a body of knowledge that tells us what to do. So, how do we stop them from saying, I have an idea? We have to be very good, what I call enablers, and I know that's sometimes a negative term. We have to walk into a meeting of the fundraising committee or a meeting with our CEO who has to sign the direct mail letter. We have to walk in anticipating that they're going to say, like the CEO, like that letter, that's just not my voice. We know he's going to say that because we've just been to a workshop with Jeff Brooks, one of the foremost direct mail writers, and he's written a bunch of books on it. And he just told us how to write a direct mail letter better. We know the boss is going to go, oh no. So anticipate it. Preempt it. So think about this for a moment. Let's just pretend, okay, that our boss's name is Sarah. Okay? Now, all of us have just been to a workshop about donor communications. And I believe Tom Ahern is going to be talking about that sometime today, donor communications. So we know that this is going to be like shocking to CEO Sarah. Okay? So how would I'm anticipating she's going to go, that's not my voice. Oh, and she's also going to say that's an incomplete sentence. Okay? So I'm walking in. Sarah really likes salted caramel. So I've come in and I said, Sarah, I just went to a workshop about how to write better direct mail. The research shows that writing the direct mail this way will produce more money. Now, I'm going to just warn you. It's very different than what we've already written. And you may feel like it doesn't represent your voice. But I'm telling you, this is the way to do it. So I've brought some candy. Here is your first piece of salted caramel. I suggest you eat it before you read the letter. Then, after you read the letter, you can have another piece, and then we'll talk. It is our job as fundraisers to anticipate and preempt. When you go to a fundraising committee meeting, you don't say, hi, do you have any ideas? You go in and you say, according to research, this is how we do it. So this is our plan, and this is what's going to happen. And you say it nicely, and again, give them a glass of wine if that would help. But think about this. Does anybody at a board meeting, or do any of your staff colleagues say to the accountant, I have an idea. about accounting. We work in nonprofits. We are stuck, if you will, with a certain level sometimes of disrespect. And then we have the power dynamic. Excuse me, this is another version of Well Missy. I'm the president of the biggest bank in this state. So I know tons of stuff. Yes, sir, you may well know tons of stuff, but you don't know fundraising. Would you tell your brain surgeon, I have ideas? No, what you hope is your brain surgeon is reading articles all the time and the newest research. So, those are what I would call organizational weaknesses. We simply don't know what we don't know. We think that boards are supposed to be about money and fundraising. And we, as professionals, may not be lifelong learners. So, if we want to fix this, which I do because I want every organization to raise more money, then the way we do it is by learning the body of knowledge. So, I'm going to throw out some names, okay? These are names of people and their areas of focus. And I want you to think about, have you read their work? So I already told you about Roger Craver. A lot of Roger's blogs are not about direct mail anymore. They're more about, some of them it's about academic research. So I mentioned Jeff Brooks, who is one of the best direct mail letter writers in the world and has multiple books. It's always awkward for me to mention Tom Ahern because he and I are life partners. But Tom Ahern is one of the best direct mail letter writers in the world. How? Because he learned this stuff. He read books by Jeff Brooks and other people. We have a whole new thing going down right now. And it's academic research. So, for example, there's a man named Adrian Sargent, S-A-R-G-E-A-N-T, right? I see Janet, for example, nodding her head. Adrian Sargent is pretty much the foremost academic researcher in fundraising. He did the research on how or what donor loyalty is, right? He has started something called the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy in the UK. That's where he's from. And he's married to this woman named Jen Shang, who, by the way, was the first PhD in philanthropy out of the Lilly School. Jen is a psychologist. She's a philanthropic psychologist. She kind of invented the application of psychology to philanthropy. Now, it's my understanding that psychology, right? It's like how our brain kind of works, sort of, and like how we decide things and everything. So, how many of you think it might be a good idea to learn about philanthropic psychology? Just think about that. So they have a number of different programs now about philanthropic psychology. I took the certificate in philanthropic psychology the first time it was offered. It was 8 weeks of study. I can only tell you that I'm proud of myself that I continued to take it, that I stuck by it. But it's really eye-opening. Now, I can't explain philanthropic psychology to you, but I can tell you that it's one of the best ways, and it is the new thing after donor-centered. It's the way we engage people. It's understanding what motivates people. And then it also is, how do we translate that into like direct mail letters, newsletters, etc. I want to be part of that team. I don't want to be part of the team that writes direct mail letters that don't work because nobody read Brooks or Hearn or anybody else. I want to be a part of the team that's going, holy crap, there's this thing called philanthropic psychology. Somebody has to take a class on it so that we can figure out how to apply it. So to me, that's part of our job. And if you'll recall, what I'm doing right now is a keynote address. This is not a workshop. I am not telling you how to write direct mail. I'm trying to inspire you to think, wow, I should learn how to write direct mail better. I should go read all of the research reports at the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy. So for example, there's a research report on how to make good fundraising events, okay? I hate fundraising events. I don't like to do them. I don't like to go to them. And I think golf tournaments are like the biggest laugh in the world because unless you're actually a golf organization, what the hell is a golf tournament doing to nurture the relationship with donors? So this research tells you how to take an event and make it a link and a way of developing and nurturing the relationship with donors. Don't you want to know that for your next fundraising event? Okay, so I think one of the biggest problems we fundraisers have is that we don't know enough about governance, right? And how many of you have like a fundraising committee with board members on it? Remember, the ones who have ideas for you? So how do we stop them from giving us ideas? And again, that's the anticipate and preempt, right? It's redirecting them. Who gets to direct the fundraising program? The board members? The committee? The board itself? No. It's you, the chief fundraiser. Even if you're a small organization and you're also the executive director, you have to be knowledgeable. In my experience, at least 50%, if not more, of fundraising problems are problems with the board. Because we don't know, as fundraisers, we're not sufficiently knowledgeable in governance, we don't know how to anticipate, preempt. We don't know how to shape a conversation so it limits going down the idea path. We don't necessarily lead by starting the conversation and saying, today we're going to be talking about direct mail. And I'm just warning you all that you're going to be shocked when you see it, but it's okay. Because we're following the body of knowledge. Or we're going to talk about whether we really should keep doing the golf tournament. It's really not netting that much money anyway. And if there's a better way to nurture the relationships, and really we do 5 fundraising events a year, that's not the best way to raise money. And then that also links to who are you going to put on the board? All the rich people who have rich connections? I've actually watched rooms, okay, where it was like, imagine that someone in your community knows Bill and Melinda. You know who I'm talking about, right? Bill and Melinda. So you want to get them on your board, right? Because then that person who knows Bill and Melinda will go ask Bill and Melinda for a gift, right? No. You don't trespass on personal and professional relationships. You don't ask the president of the bank to go to her or his best friends for money. Our job is to identify those we suspect might be predisposed, then find out if they're actually interested. If they're not interested, if we can't qualify them as we move from predisposed to qualified as a prospect, we don't ask them. But if we qualify them, you thought I was predisposed about blank. So you kind of checked and tested a little bit and talked with me. You looked at where I give my gifts and you go, wow, she's a really good match for us. All this social justice, equity stuff. So then you reach out. You don't ask right away. You reach out, right? Introduce yourself. You nurture the relationship. You get me ready to be asked. Then you ask me. Then you thank me. Then you report what you did with my money. Then you keep nurturing relationships. You ask me again. How do we not remember this every time? Or how do we remember it and we have to convince our boss that this is the way to do it? And it's always been the way to do it. We know that people give through your organization to fulfill their own aspirations. So here's another example, another story. My father died of cancer. He died before he met half of the spouses of his 6 children, before he met all of the children, his grandchildren. Now, it would have been smart, it would have certainly been appropriate for perhaps the hospital where he was treated, right? To consider asking me for a gift or to find out if I'm interested. Or it would have been appropriate in some way, right, for the local cancer association to reach out. We've all seen these sorts of things. Well, nobody reached out, neither the hospital nor the cancer association, but it's okay because I would never have given to them. Of course, I'm sad my father died. Within 2 hours of me arriving back in my hometown of East Lansing, Michigan, MSU, I'd set up a scholarship fund in my father's name for students at Michigan State University to go to a French-speaking country. It didn't have to be France. Go to a French-speaking country and go to school for 6 months or a term or a semester and learn what it was like to live in a different country where they ate different foods, etc., etc., etc. Do we know that about the donors? Because that can move into the neglect thing, that we're neglecting our donors, that we're not finding out the right stuff, that we're not getting their stories. One of the things that really annoys me and also gives me a chuckle is the term major gift and major donor. So I know all of you give somewhere, to multiple somewheres, I'm sure. So how did the multiple somewheres decide, or how does your organization decide what is a major gift and a major donor? You know, it's usually a price point, right? So you don't give at the major donor level. You're nice, really. No, you're nice and we like you. But you're not one of the really special people. How insulting can we be? How insulting can we be? And to me, that's a regular thing that, as the agitator says, poor practices have major donors. Now, the other cool, weird aside, okay, is that the largest gift most people ever make is the gift in the will. And by the way, research says do not use the term bequests with those donors. Use the term gift in the will. That's research from Richard Radcliffe in the UK, who's talked to something like 25,000 will donors. So the largest gift most people ever make is the gift in the will. And who are those prospects? You know who those prospects are? Your regular donors, the ones who are giving $50, $75, maybe $100 a year, and they've been doing it for multiple years. Australia, UK, I can't remember who else, Canada, all raise more money in bequests than the United States does. I would call that a what? Lack of best practices? But we can learn it. It's so easy to learn. It's there, sitting, waiting for us. And then we can do it better. And we can raise more money for our causes. So let's see, poor practices, downright neglect, organizational weaknesses. You see, to me, this is not a new normal right now. Yes, it's shocking that we can't be with people. But an interesting question to ask yourself or any colleague is, did you, within the first, month of COVID, did you and your board members call every single donor you have? Just to say hi. Just to say thank you. I have a client where the executive director suggested that, board members, because the research says the call from the board member is better than the thank you call from staff. Every single board member refused to make thank you calls to board members, to donors. I don't know, is that neglect? Or is it just poor practice? So, yes, the new normal could well be all of this. I don't think we're going to be going, I realize movie theaters are opening, schools are opening, all this sort of stuff. Some of us aren't going to play, particularly the aged, when you're like over 60 or so, you're in the danger zone. And I also have a pre-existing condition that puts me in the danger zone. So I'm stuck on this 5 acres of land where the nearest food is 25 minutes one way. And that's a grocery store. So, not going to be events or whatever. So how are we going to nurture those relationships? How are we going to explain to our board members that they have to make thank you calls? How are we going to get our fundraising committees to talk about the right stuff and not the wrong stuff? And for heaven's sake, I'm 50-50 on whether we should even have fundraising committees at the board. Because Most fundraising is a management function. It is not a board function. And it's not even a board member function, except like those thank you. So here we are. The new normal. Think about what that means to your organization. I actually had someone say to me the other day, we've decided, and actually this has been all over the internet, these sorts of comments, we decided not to ask for money for our charity this year because people are so busy giving to COVID. Now the face I can see the most is Janet's, and she's shaking her head. I still love you, even with COVID. Ask me for a gift. Tell me stories about how I'm making a difference. Don't not ask me for a gift. Don't assume that I'm giving to COVID. If I didn't give to cancer when my father died of cancer, I'm not giving to COVID. I'm counting on my community foundation to do that. I'm counting on the government to get its ass in gear. I'm counting on all sorts of other people. But I'm not giving to COVID. So, Kevin, I see that there are a number of questions. Are there any you would like to pull out right now?
So Simone, actually a lot of it's just some different chatter, not questions per se, but I actually did have a question I wanted to pose to you, particularly as you discuss about how you counter board members or fundraising committee members and their ideas, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the points of conversation I've heard on this topic historically was sort of the power structure or power imbalance and this perceived sort of inferiority and superiority between
Yes.
this relationship. So how do you see that coming into play as a result, as it relates to having that type of conversation?
So I'm really glad you brought that up because in fact, the power dynamic, which I've mentioned several times in different ways right here, right, is huge. So the first person I want to get on my side is the CEO. I want the CEO to look at me and say, okay, you've bought books through us. You know, we gave you money for books. You go to workshops that we pay for. You subscribe to this stuff. I'm assuming you're learning the body of knowledge. So I want the CEO to recognize there's a body of knowledge and to count on me to know it. And I want it to start with senior staff too. I want all the senior staff to know that I have the body of knowledge. I'm the one that leads this. Then, from a governance perspective, which is a huge portion of my work, I expect the CEO to be talking with the board chair saying, we have got to help the board, the collective, the group, to understand that there's a body of knowledge in accounting. There's a body of knowledge. We invite our attorney to come in and talk to the board about stuff. You know, that thing that happened, you know, but we needed the attorney to talk about it. We didn't say to the board, so what do you think? Okay. So starts with first us learning the body of knowledge and constantly being lifelong learners. It starts with us as the fundraisers talking to our CEO periodically about it and sharing tidbits with our senior staff. Then, one of the things that really good boards do, okay, at board meetings, so again, this is the collective, not the individual board member. At the board meeting, yeah, we look at the financial reports. Yes, we talk about the recession and, you know, and financial implications. But there's also a point where we do a learning thing with the board. So maybe that's, for example, it could be the mission moment of where a client comes in and tells her story, right? But also, there's learning about, let's say, fundraising, about the limits, about the boundaries, about who's in charge. Then there's a talk between the CEO, the fundraiser, and the board chair saying, do we want a committee? How will we limit them? How will we make sure they don't start saying, I've got an idea? How do we preempt that? So, think for a moment with your question, Kevin, what do we want boards to know about fundraising? What do we want the board as a group to know, and what do we want individual board members to know? I want them to know that there's a body of knowledge, academic research, etc., and that there's people who learn that, and it's not a matter of opinion. That's the first thing I want them to understand. Okay? I want them to be informed about curious and strange things that they might bump into in our fundraising program, so they don't freak out about it. I want to know, as an individual board member, what can I do to help, and will you help me help? So what do we want individual board members to do? Not the group, individual board members. Every single board member will give a gift to the best of his or her personal ability. And in fact, let's not forget that Kevin is on our board. Kevin is a single father with 6 children, and he works in the public school system kitchen. But based on our mission, he has information and engagement with it. So yes, Kevin, you will give a gift every year. We ask you. And this year you're giving $25. And that's just fine. You make the best darn thank you calls to donors of anybody in the building. You have good ideas about how to nurture relationships. So what are the things we want board members, individual board members, to do? And we, the staff, have to help them do it. We have to remind them graciously. Board chair, when I was a chief development officer, he later became the governor of Rhode Island, and he gave me one of the most marvelous compliments one day. He looked at me and said, Simone, you are the best nag I have ever encountered. So, what is it that the board has to know? What is it that the staff has to know? What is it that they don't have to know? They just count on you and me, us doing it. So does that help answer your question?
It does. And we've had a few more questions coming in actually that do relate to the board. But before I get to those questions, just a real quick housekeeping item. There was one question. You had mentioned Roger in his blog earlier. Can you just repeat Roger's last name for everyone?
Craver, C-R-A-V-E-R. It's in the handout. And the quote and the date of the blog.
And for everyone, Kim, our chapter administrator, actually during the course of Simone's presentation has actually emailed a copy of that handout to all of us. So hopefully that's in your inbox. Moving on though, some additional questions, as I said, sort of still on this board topic. What are your thoughts on board committee chairs developing meeting agendas or reports rather than staff?
Okay, so committee meetings and board meetings, the agenda is developed by the chief staff person, so as the chief development officer or the CEO, along with the chair of the committee. And I expect, as a board chair, so I've been a board chair since 1976, I think was the first board I chaired, or the first board I got on, and then I almost always end up as chair. I expect the chief development officer, who works with the fundraising committee of the board, I expect the CEO to draft the agenda and then come to me with that draft, and then we'll talk about it. And I might remind the CEO, remember that conversation we had at the last board meeting? We said we were going to circle back to it. So how are we going to circle back? Or the fundraising committee, the chief development officer, who's the partner of the chair of the fundraising committee, says, these are the 3 things we need to talk about. Fundraising committee isn't going to approve anything. The board barely approves anything about fundraising. So we come up with what is it that we have to talk about. And there are 2 reasons I think a fundraising committee is somewhat valuable. One, the fact that it's a committee of the board says fundraising is important, okay? Secondly, I want to convince all those people on the fundraising committee about body of knowledge, blah, 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 so that at the board meetings, when someone says, I have an idea, it's a committee member who's also a board member who says, excuse me, we don't have ideas for fundraising. The staff have this like whole, list and body of knowledge about what to do. That make sense?
Thank you for that. So one more question actually here related to board, and it's related to asking a board member for their gift. So you discuss how fundraising is a management responsibility and not board function. Best practices for peer-to-peer fundraising and board members to solicit fellow board members for their annual gift. Who do you believe should ask a board member for their gift, a fellow board member or staff?
Fellow board member, not staff. I say fundraising is a management issue to manage it all and to hand out or to proselytize about the best practice. Every board I have chaired, I say to the staff, me and the vice chair will divide up the board members and we'll ask them. I do not believe staff should ask. And I don't believe it should be a letter. It should be a personal solicitation where the staff has told us, the board chair and the vice chair, how much the person is given, which of course is confidential, and how much the staff would recommend that we ask for. And to me, that's what one of the key things the board chair does.
So along the same vein, but kind of expanding out, so what's the purpose of the board? I know kind of a broad general question, but so in your view, what's the purpose of the board?
So the purpose of a board, first of all, it's a legal requirement, but the purpose is to ensure the health and effectiveness of the corporation. That's also the purpose of management, to ensure the health and effectiveness of the corporation. So the board is at a different level, and I don't even like saying higher, but the board is at a different level. It has certain specific decisions as a board that it makes, like approves a job description of the CEO, hires, appraises, and fires the CEO. The board chair doesn't do that. That's the board of directors in a conversation of the board of directors. The board of directors looks at the finances. Now again, the finance staff are looking at finances too. It's a matter of degree.
So we've got some additional board questions, but before I get to those, I want to make sure I don't forget this one question that was asked a little bit earlier. Mm-hmm. So what would be the best book that you would recommend for someone to read who is new to the philanthropy world?
I would read Fundraising Principles and Practice by Sargent and Shang. It's the only book that was ever written as a university textbook for fundraising. It's the first book I would read. It's the overview of. Then I would look at the CFRE test content outline, which is on the CFRE website. And if you don't want to get the CFRE, that's fine. But I would look at the test content outline and I'd say, oh, this is the stuff I'm supposed to know? Which books should I be reading?
So in a little bit, oh, someone just asked, can you say the name of the book once more?
Yes, Fundraising Principles and Practice. It's like this thick, by Sargent and Shang.
Great, thank you. Kind of a follow-up though to your previous question in a response, doesn't the board of directors have to be involved in revenue development in order to truly embrace a culture of philanthropy? So
the board of directors, again, distinguishing between the collective and the individual. So I have a whole set of things that I want to recruit board members to do as individuals. I want the board as a collective to endorse or approve the fundraising plan. And I expect the fundraising plan to be presented at the same time as the annual budget. I expect that they, the board as a collective, might have questions, just like they may have questions about finance. I do not expect them to get into, I don't think we should do this, I don't think we should do that. Because they wouldn't say that to the accountant.
So how do you feel about a give or get minimum for board members?
Absolutely not. Because, Kevin, if you'll recall, you're on my board. You know, single father, 6 kids, work in the school kitchen, all right? But you're a smart thinker. You understand the community really well, the community we're serving. And we want you on our board. And you're going to only give $25. And it's never give or get. You give if you're a board member. You're going to go ask me or Janet or anybody else for a gift. You damn well better have given. And then if we go back to give or get, oh, so I have to get $5,000? From whom? I don't know anyone who can give $5,000. And I'm not going to trespass on my personal and professional relationships. That's lousy fundraising. Just because I know Bill and Melinda, I am not asking them for a gift. I actually know them well enough to know that they don't care about this cause. So I think give or get policies are awful.
Well, that's an emphatic answer.
Okie dokie.
I think actually we're out of questions right now, but please folks still keep them coming if you have some more. I don't know, Simone, if you have some more to share with us here. We've got just under 10 minutes remaining in our session.
So I'm looking at my little agenda. And I do want to state again that I do believe that a significant portion of fundraising problems have actually nothing to do with fundraising. They are problems in other parts of the system, okay? And I was actually in a position where I said that when I was a chief development officer, and boy, was I not popular. I worked at a theater company, and we had been increasing our charitable giving every year, but then we weren't increasing much anymore. And I kept trying to figure out why. We still had some of the same donors, they just weren't increasing, blah, blah, blah. So I raised the point at a senior staff meeting saying, I've tried to figure this out, and there is a thought that has come to my mind. Our founding artistic director is no longer with us. He's also the founding artistic director of a theater actually in Dallas, and this was in Rhode Island where I was working. So he's not spending as much time with the product. And we're getting more and more complaints about the plays. And I'm just wondering, so that has nothing to do with fundraising. I'm just wondering if that's an issue. So, most fundraising problems, or a lot of fundraising problems, are not actually fundraising problems. They are problems in another part of the system because it's all a system. I have a client who just said to me, so I've just taken over as executive director, and I realized, because this client had been at the organization, then she became the executive director. She said, I don't know what was going on in any of the other parts of the organization because we were siloed. So somebody's doing this over there, somebody's doing this over there, over there. It's called systems thinking. It's one of the biggest bad things we have, silos instead of systems thinking. So let's see.
So Simone, I actually do have one other question that came in, and I think this is a very important one. So many organizations fall short in the area of stewardship. what ideas can you share to improve this part of the process in order to enhance donor retention?
Donor thank you calls by board members. So that's one of the things that board members can volunteer to do. I made, as a board chair of a $40 million healthcare organization, I said I would do thank you calls. So I was given 3 to 5 thank you calls to make every other month or so. So there's stewardship, a thank you call from a board member. Another thank you call, of course, the immediate 48 hours, you send me the formal thank you letter. Let's see, what else? One of the most wonderful things, if you've never had this experience as a donor, and you've never given this experience, it's interviewing donors for their philanthropic stories. This is one of the most magnificent experiences that any donor could ever have, and we can offer this. We call and we say, we'd like to come and interview you about why you give to us. We're going to type it up and you can give it to your children. And we might want to take a part of it, which would, of course, we would show to you first and put it in the newsletter. I'm assuming that the newsletter has pictures of donors, stories of donors. One of the most marvelous experiences I ever had was when my partner and I were interviewed for our philanthropic story by our community foundation. And I knew they weren't doing it as a gimmick. They actually said, you know, we're going to put it in a file so when none of us work here anymore and new people work here, they could read it and figure out what the Simone Joyeux and Tom Ahern Fund is and why it is. So you can do that. You can do it big or you can do it small. It's one of the best things you could ever do. You could ask at every event you do. Think about events, you know, how where we have speakers, you know. I mean, they welcome us, right? So we have what? Maybe the CEO and the board chair, all right? How's about who the hell cares at the board chair talks? How about one of the people you benefited? How about that person stands up and says, this is what your organization did for me?
These are all great ideas. Thank you so much. We've got just a couple minutes and I've got one final question that I'd like to pose to you.
Yes.
So advice on how to affect change when you're not the CEO, and especially when the CEO doesn't see, or worse, doesn't address certain issues. This individual's experienced this in previous positions and has found themselves getting frustrated.
Yeah. So at some point it's a decision. So when you're looking for a job, think about what questions you expect them to ask you and what questions you want to ask them. I would talk about, if I were interviewing for a job, and when I do that as a consultant, I'll say, so how's your organization do with systems thinking? What about your organizational culture? Since Peter Drucker, management guru, said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So what are the kinds of questions you want to be asked? And if they don't ask them, what are the kinds of questions you want to ask? I would spend a lot of time trying to convince my fellow staff colleagues, senior staff, whatever. I would spend time trying to convince my CEO of, you know, and I do it again with candy and long term. And if they didn't change, then I would look at myself in the mirror and say, can I afford to quit and get a different job? Because you deserve better.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that advice in particular, but certainly for joining us. I know I speak on behalf of Janet and our entire chapter, Simone, in saying thank you for joining us this morning. Everyone, we're going to be going on about a 6-minute break here. We're going to be returning at 9:45 for our breakout sessions. And with that, I will say goodbye. And Simone has one last comment here.
Right, so my website is full of free material, so handouts. The operative word is free. You can download them. You can retype them onto your letterhead and use them as job descriptions or whatever you want. So there's tons of stuff on governance, fundraising, etc. And it's just all there for the taking.
Can you give us the address there, the website address?
SimoneTroyo.com.
Easy enough.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you again. Have a wonderful day.